Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Church of Lincoln. My name is Kathy Disney. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a worship associate of this church. I will be joined on the chancel in person and virtually by other worship associates, Amy Miller and Jamie Radcliffe. Over the last few years, the way that we have met has often changed, but whether in person, on Zoom, or a YouTube live stream, or some way of being that we cannot yet imagine, worshiping together is a chance to deepen our connection with the sources of meaning in our lives, to proclaim who we are and what we are about, throwing open the doors of our congregation and proclaiming the radical love and welcome that is at the heart of our faith. At this time, Peg Pelter from the Board of Trustees would like to offer her own welcome and to give us a few announcements.
Good morning. I'm Peg Pelter, a member of the Board of Trustees. I want to offer a special welcome to those of you who are visiting for the first time. I have a few announcements to share as our church community extends beyond Sunday morning worship. Join us next Sunday evening for the Transition Town Hall, Sunday, October 13th at 6 p.m. Chat with Reverend AJ and the Transition team to share your hopes and fears for our church's future. Mark your calendars for our next big fundraising event. We are hosting a large vendor show called Handmade Harvest on Friday, November 8th, and Saturday, November 9th. Many of our members and friends will be selling their original arts and crafts. We will be sharing more details in upcoming e-blasts, Facebook posts, and in the November newsletter. And then also I was asked to give a bit of a testimonial about what this church means to me and why it is important and all of that. And I'll be honest with you, I kind of struggled with it. But then I remembered a moment. I was on the 2016 team, and we were coming up with the visions and plans to remodel the church and build a sanctuary. And, oh wow, you know, about a year and a half in, 75 meetings, 65 meetings, somewhere in there, we came to the horrifying realization that we could remodel the church school, we could build the office wing, we could probably have a nice music room, but there was going to be no sanctuary. And man, that hurt. And then we had to stand in front of the congregation and tell them that there was going to be no sanctuary. So it was early March 2015. And in our infinite wisdom, we decided that we would do Irish coffee. A little whipped cream, little sugar, little bourbon wouldn't hurt. So anyway, Les, bless his heart, fast talker Les, with a laser pointer is going through the numbers, explaining it all. And the rest of us were lined up behind Les, somewhat terrified. But then a miracle happened. Somebody stood up and said, you know, you guys did the best you could. You did a great job. We believe in you. And then somebody else stood up and said that. And then somebody else stood up and said that. And then we voted. And 85, 95% of you said, yes, let's go ahead. And it was the most humbling moment and the proudest moment of my life.
Thank you, Peg. I think we should all just go home right now. But we do have a service to do, so I'll introduce Christine Davis, who's going to come up and do a little pledge moment.
Thanks, Peg. I'm Christine Davis, one of the co-chairs of our annual giving celebration. And I want to begin by grounding us as an interdependent community. Kathy Disney, will you lead all of these folks in the response. Some gathered here or online have never made a financial pledge to the church. They may be visitors or may have signed the membership book after last year's pledge drive ended.
Our response is going to be, I am grateful they are among us. I am grateful they are among us.
Some gathered here or online have grown their financial pledge steadily over time as they are able.
I am grateful they are among us.
Some gathered here or online will have to reduce their financial pledge this year for reasons private to them.
I am grateful they are among us.
Some gathered here or online are able and willing to pledge 3% of their gross income.
I am grateful they are among us.
Some gathered here or online are able and willing to pledge more than 3% of their gross income.
I am grateful they are among us.
Some gathered here or online wish they could make a financial pledge, but simply cannot.
I am grateful they are among us.
And some gathered here or online have given one-time gifts in addition to their pledge that they cannot sustain.
I am grateful they are among us.
When Al and I introduced ourselves as your annual giving co-chairs on September 15, Al promised we were going to learn together during the coming weeks. And learn we have, from church leaders, from number crunching, and from all of you. And as we have learned, we have been determined to revise the information we share, to reflect that learning, to be transparent. We are all, thankfully, joyfully moving at the speed of trust.
We are grateful.
In parallel with our efforts, the finance team determined that we could reduce uncertainty by calling pledge units who seemed, based on their pledge payments, to have become inactive. In addition, those pledge units who have moved or whom we have lost and grieved this year have been taken into account. This means the 238 pledge units from last year, reflected in our pledge walk and other estimates, must be adjusted to 215 pledge units. An additional 18 prospective pledgers among us who have never pledged may bring that total back up to 233. Time will tell. This really was the point of the pledge walk the past 3 weeks, trying to show how a relatively small group of people bringing so many different gifts must join together to fund this place. And in so doing, make this climate-friendly building, Reverend AJ's ministry, many wonderful musicians, nourishing educational opportunities for young and old, lovely art, kinship, justice work, not to mention lights, a fully equipped kitchen, great meeting spaces, so many things possible. The Pledge Walk also gave my co-chair Ellen, me, and team members Carrie and Susan last week the chance to talk with you about the M word, money. Some people were surprised by what they saw. Some wanted to know more. Many people grew in their understanding of the wide variety of gifts we bring and why the distribution of those gifts today makes us over-rely on too few people and under-rely on too many people. We wondered together what makes people pledge at the levels they do. And I remembered my first pledge, $30. And it wasn't because it was all I could spare. I was fortunate to have a job with regular income, but nobody had asked me. Nobody had informed me. Once I realized the church had expenses and just a couple hundred people to cover them, my pledge grew until I reached the 3% recommended level of giving. And then, because I was lucky to have the support of a second income in my household, I decided to pass that 3%. And for 2025, I will continue that practice. Not everyone who is working or living on retirement income can give 3% of their gross income. And that is why those of us who can do so need to give a bit more. And this year, that will determine whether we can continue to fund our interim ministry with Reverend AJ. Elle and I want to encourage all those who can give 3% but haven't done so to make this the year to make that transition. We'll include more information about 3% giving in the pledge letter we're mailing this week. There is another topic that came up while we walked those pledges and talked. It is something that I'm not sure we talk about enough. Giving financially to the church, if you are able, is very different than any other giving you might do. Unlike a business, we don't make a profit that would cover any of our expenses. Unlike a nonprofit, our status aside, we aren't funded through grants or other fundraising efforts. It's just us, me, and all of you in here in this room, and those of you online. In fact, the closest payment I have to my pledge payment is a car payment. Money I am lucky to spend to have safe, reliable transportation, to get to the places I need for nourishment, work, companionship, family time, so many places. Maybe my pledge isn't so different after all. It gives me the means to travel the many miles my spirit seeks with companions and nourishment along the way. I hope the small gift of joy from your annual giving team stirs your imagination this week as you think about how you will respond when your pledge letter arrives. All pledges will be due by the end of the month. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christine. The Unitarian Church of Lincoln aspires to be a loving community, uniting reason with spiritual exploration to transform ourselves and our world. We have a big vision here, and we know that creating a loving community begins with welcome. So whether this is your first time here or your 500th, if you came here hopeful or heartbroken, whatever your age, gender, skin color, whomever you love, you are welcome here. And in this month, the month of October, we particularly extend a welcome and acknowledge the LGBTQ+ History Month. I believe there might be places at the table for the dinner. You should check with the church office if you're interested in attending the history dinner. As we enter into worship, please take a moment to center yourself in this place. Find a comfortable place with your body. Take a few deep breaths, and let us continue into worship with our chalice lighting.
Our chalice lighting words today are by Scott Taylor. As we light this flame, may we hear what it has to say. Come back to your center, it calls. Return to the quiet, it whispers. The quiet we long for and that longs for us. From this stillness always a voice arises if we let it. So come, friends, let us listen once again. Let us find that flame inside that guides us back home.
You please stand in body and spirit, and we'll sing hymn number 112 in the gray hymnal, Do You Hear?
If anyone would like to come forward for the story, you can do so now. Our story today is called The Other Way to Listen by Bird Baylor. I used to know an old man who could walk by any cornfield and hear the corn singing. Teach me, I'd say when we'd pass on by. I never said a word while he was listening. Just tell me how you learned to hear that corn. And he'd say, it takes a lot of practice. You can't be in a hurry. And I'd say, I have time. He was so good at listening, once he heard wildflower seeds burst open, beginning to grow underground. That is hard to do. He said he was just lucky to have been by himself up there in the canyon after a rain. He said it was the quietest place he'd ever been, and he stayed there long enough to understand the quiet. I said, I bet you were surprised when you heard those seeds. But he said, no, I wasn't surprised at all. It seemed like the most natural thing in the world. And he just smiled, remembering. Another time he heard a rock kind of murmur good things to a lizard. I was there. He saw the lizard sunning on a rock, and of course we stopped, and the old man said, I wonder how that lizard feels about the rock it's sitting on, and how the rock feels about the lizard. He always asked himself hard questions that take a while to answer. We leaned against another rock. A long time passed, and then he said, oh, did you hear that? They like each other fine. I said, I didn't hear a thing. He said, sometimes everything being right makes a kind of sound. Like just now, it wasn't much more than a good feeling that I heard from that old rock. Were you surprised to hear it? I always had to ask. He said, not a bit. It seemed like the most natural thing in the world. I said, I wish I'd heard it too. He said, he thought that I might someday. He told me how a friend of his once heard a whole sky full of stars when she was 7. Have you heard stars? And later on, when she was 83 years old, she heard a cactus blooming in the dark. At first, she didn't know what she was hearing. She found it by just following the sound. There were 20 flowers on one cactus, and they were all white as the moon. The old man said, most people never hear those things at all. I said, I wonder why. And he said, they just don't take the time you need for something that important. And I said, I'll take the time, but first, you have to teach me. I'd like to, if I could, he said, but the thing is, you have to learn it from the hills and ants and lizards and weeds and things like that. They do the teaching around here. Well, you have to give me some clue on how to start, I said. And so he said, do this. You get to know one thing as well as you can. It should be something small. Don't start with a mountain. Don't start with the whole Pacific Ocean. Just start with one seed pod or one dry weed or one horned toad or one handful of dirt or one sandy wash. I said, I'll take the sandy wash. He said he started with just one tree. Every morning of his life when he was young, he climbed a cottonwood and sat there listening. He told me it was worth the time. He said trees are very honest and they don't care much for fancy people. And he said he doesn't know of anything he ever did as important as sitting in that tree. Tell me everything you can, I said. He said, well, you have to respect that tree or hill or whatever it is you're with. take a horned toad, for example. If you think you're better than a horned toad, you'll never hear its voice, even if you sit there in the sun forever. And he said, don't be ashamed to learn from bugs or sand or anything. You think a bug has something to teach you? I said, I won't. And he thought of one more thing. It's good to walk with people, but sometimes go alone. That way, he said, you can always stop and listen at the right time. I'll remember everything, I said. And I did. I thought there must be something wrong with me because I only hear wind and quail and coyotes and doves, just things that anyone could hear. And I almost gave up trying. Of course, I still went walking in my hills. In fact, I used to sing to them a lot. I thought that since they wouldn't sing to me, I'd just sing to them instead. And the day I'm telling you about now, I was singing, and the whole song was just this. Hello, hills. Hello, hills. Hello, hills. Hello. Can you do that? Hello, hills. Hello, hills. Hello, hills. Hello. And that was after I had been away 5 days and I had missed those hills. 5 days. I went out earlier than usual. You know how everything looks new at sunrise? Well, all those hills were looking new, and I was just walking where I always walk. But that morning I kept thinking, here I am. And whatever way I happened to go was always right. I climbed the rocky side, not the path. The rocky side is steeper, but I like it best. And anyway, that's where I found my 3 hawk feathers. And I stood at the top where I always stand, looking down, and I sang, hello, hills, hello, hills, hello, hills, hello. And all I know is suddenly I wasn't the only one singing. The hills were singing too. I stopped. I didn't move for maybe an hour. I have never listened so hard in my life. And of course, their singing isn't loud. It isn't any sound you can explain. It isn't made with words. You couldn't write it down. All I can say is it came straight up from those dark, shiny lava rocks humming. It moved around like wind. It seemed to be the oldest sound in the world. All I can say is I was standing in the middle of that sound at 7 o'clock in the morning, just thinking, here I am. And thinking, listen, and not even being surprised. It seemed like the most natural thing in the world. And that is the end of our story. I have just a quick announcement because it didn't make it into the board announcements. We have a tile painting project after service, and we will need help with some tables and chairs in the sanctuary. And we would love for you to paint a tile. It's going to be part of a mural eventually, so you can be a part of church history. And now, as the children head back to their classes, I invite my friend Chris Sayer up.
I don't talk as much as I used to, 'cause lately it just ain't my style. And the hard times don't hurt like they ought to. They pass quicker like when I was a child. But somehow I've learned how to listen for a sound like the sun going down, in the magic that morning is bringing. There's a song for the life I have found. It keeps my feet on the ground. Now these early fall days aren't so heavy. They just flow like the breeze through your mind, where nothing appears in a hurry to make up for some old lost time. And somehow I've learned how to listen for a sound like the sun going down, in the magic that morning is bringing. There's a song for the life I have found. Keeps my feet on the ground. And somehow I've learned how to listen, and it sounds like the breeze dying down, in the magic that morning is bringing. There's a song for the life I have found. It keeps my feet on the ground.
Thank you, Chris. It's so good to see you here. A central part of our service is the time we join together as a community to mark the moments of our lives. We share with one another our joys, our sorrows, the events that mark the steps on our journey. The threads of sorrow and those of joy are intertwined in the fabric of our lives, present for all, remembered by all. We share those threads, and then they are woven together with those of others in our community. Our joys are shared and magnified. We are comforted in our sorrows. I invite you to type into the chat if you are online, or to speak into this shared space your name or the name of another you wish to be remembered in sorrow. Deirdre. Rosie. Sandy. Linda. Orly.
People affected by the hurricane floods.
The people affected by the hurricane floods. Les Mans still at Hope Lodge in Omaha.
Family and friends of Lori Woods.
The family and friends of Lori Woods. The people of Lebanon. There's nothing in the chat right now, but if something comes around in the way of sorrow, I will come back to it before we finish. Joy is also a part of this community, so I invite you to type into the chat or to speak into this shared space your name or the name of another you wish to have remembered in joy.
Jennifer Brown, my daughter visiting from Seattle.
Jennifer Brown, Linda's daughter, visiting from Seattle.
My sister Linda, who's finishing her rounds of chemo and radiation this week.
Karen's sister Linda, who is finishing her rounds of chemo and radiation this week.
Robin, my dear friend, who just celebrated a birthday.
Robin, who just celebrated a birthday.
Monica.
Monica.
Frivolous actions of a new kitten.
The frivolous actions of a new kitten.
I have 4 joys. One, I want to thank Chris Sayer for coming to my new residence and playing for my new neighbors.
Let's do them one at a time, Jim. Jim has 4 joys. One is Chris Sayer coming to his new residence and playing for them.
Number 2, my granddaughter just got her driver's license, so I gave her my second car.
His granddaughter just got her driver's license, and so he gave her a car.
And the third one, we closed on our house.
Closed on the house.
Yes. And the fourth one is we celebrate our 49th anniversary all on one.
And they celebrated their 49th anniversary. Such a busy time.
Sheila will celebrate her 88th birthday tomorrow.
Sheila Wall will celebrate her 80th birthday tomorrow. 89. 88. 88. So sorry, Sheila. I had you at 80. In their chat, Erica Berkey Rios says, I can picture Chris playing here when I was a much younger person. His playing gives me great joy. And Marcia Cedardall says, joy, going to see my Texas family tomorrow. We know, too, that there are some joys and some sorrows that are yet unspoken but deeply felt. Let us hold a moment of silence for everything that is unspoken. Thank you for your presence. Now, please remain seated as we sing number 391 in the Teal hymnal, Voice Still and Small. We will sing it through 2 times.
Each week, we take up a collection to support the work of this church and our partners in the community. We do this because just as we all grow from our participation in this community, we all give back through our time, our talent, and our treasure. As our next piece from our guest musician, Chris, plays, the ushers will hand out the offering plates. You can also give by texting UC Lincoln and the amount you wish to give to 73256. That's UC Lincoln and the amount to 73256. The offering will now be gratefully received.
reading this morning is from the poem Counsels by Marge Piercy. We must sit down and reason together. We must sit down. Men standing want to hold forth. They rain down upon faces lifting. We must sit down on the floor, on the earth, on stones and mats and blankets. There must be no front to the speaking, no platform, no rostrum, no stage or table. We will not crane to see who is speaking. Perhaps we should sit in the dark. In the dark, we could utter our feelings. In the dark, we could propose and describe and suggest. In the dark, we would not see who speaks, and only the words would say what they say. Thus saying what we feel and what we want, what we fear for ourselves and each other into the dark, perhaps we could begin to listen. Perhaps we should talk in groups small enough for everyone to speak. Perhaps we should start by speaking softly. The women must learn to say, I think this is so. The men must learn to stop dancing solos on the ceiling. After each speaks, he or she will repeat a ritual phrase. It is not I who speaks, but the wind. Wind blows through me. Long after me is the wind.
Good morning. My name is Amy Meller. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a member of the Worship Associates for this church. Periodically, our minister has a Sunday off, and the Worship Associates or another guest will speak. Today, you have two mini sermons, a mini sermon from me and a mini sermon from our Worship Associate, Jamie Radcliffe. Both are on this month's theme, deep listening. I used to think that I was tuned in, attentive, and listening, and then I adopted a dog. Lucy was one of those gifts of the pandemic quarantine period. I used to work too much, and I was just not home enough to be a responsible dog owner. But once we were all in lockdown, I realized I can get a dog. Now, if you haven't met Lucy or seen her pictures, stop me at coffee hour. I'll show you lots of pictures. But for those of you that need a word picture, let me describe her. She's a mutt, but mostly German Shepherd, and yet pure white, shockingly, fluffily white German Shepherd. She does have those pointed ears, almost like a wolf, but such a friendly, tail-wagging wolf. When I adopted her, she was 10 and not in great health, and so she wasn't running and gamboling at the shelter. She was sitting. But when I was talking to her and telling her she was a good dog, she did what all of us know good dogs do. The head tilt. Cats do it too, but dogs and cats really do that head tilt when they're listening to you very, very, very closely, which melted my heart, and so I took home this senior dog who's now 14. Now, she's a senior. She has a very dignified personality. So when I brought her home, I learned she wasn't interested in playing games. She didn't want to tug. She didn't want to play chase. She didn't want to get a ball. But she lights up if I take her for a walk. So it's the middle of a global crisis, and I'm doing dog walks. A lot of dog walks. Maybe 5 dog walks a day. But how could I refuse? She loves them so much, and I wasn't doing anything else. So she is a senior dog. Please don't imagine that these were cardio sessions 5 times a day. We meander, we stroll, and there's a lot of stopping and sniffing. Long minutes of sniffing. So initially, I would walk along with Lucy, listening to music or an audiobook to keep myself entertained while she was just doing all of her sniffing business. But then I started noticing that on the times that I walked without music or an audiobook playing, I came home feeling more recharged. While Lucy was doing her gathering of information and appreciating the world, I was absorbing information that I had ignored before. Just like the old man in Chelsea's story, I started observing things. Ah, the shape of the knots in that tree sort of looked like a face. That squirrel with the angry, twitching tail is both elegant and hilarious. I would notice small items, cracks in the sidewalk, individual feathers left behind by a bird. I was finally listening and seeing the world more deeply in a way that I had not before. And when we come home for our walks, Lucy does not want to come inside. She wants to hang out in the front yard, and so I'll sit on the porch, no matter the weather, and wait until she's finally ready to come inside. So I'll sit on the porch looking at her out in the yard, and those pointy ears are swiveling like satellite dishes, picking up, and I'm starting to notice other things. An acorn ricocheting off of a car hood. Oh, that's just one of those common little brown birds, but it's got such a cool chirp, chirp sound to it. Oh, there's a cricket making very hopeful, romantic noises. Watching her fuzzy ears turn back and forth tune me in to start listening to things that I haven't heard before. In the 4 years since Lucy joined me, I've started to meet countless people that I had never known before, even though they were right there and I just wasn't out in the park or sitting on my porch. Some of these are neighbors. We hadn't crossed paths because I was indoors before. Some of them are folks who are currently homeless and they've just spent the night at the park at the end of my block. Some of them are kids on their way to school. Some are utility workers trying to do their job, but they stop to say hi to the dog. Some are people where I don't speak their language, so we just wave and give each other thumbs up. When we do have conversations, they're not deep. We talk about the weather or how pretty she is. But these are conversations that I wasn't having before. I'm 53 now, and I want to keep evolving. I want to keep learning. I want to keep changing and having new conversations with new people. And I feel this urge particularly because, unlike a lot of my friends, I haven't traveled widely. I've lived my whole life in Nebraska, and I'm white, and I'm cisgender. It would be very easy for me to just slide into the habit of being part of the community I've always been a part of, and not trying to change and not trying to listen to lives other than mine. But that's not what Unitarian Universalists do, is it? Our fourth principle says we believe in a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. That search for truth and meaning doesn't let me rest. I can't imagine that my worldview is the only one or the right one. I have to keep asking, how do other people live? How do other people think about the world? Should I be changing and challenging what I think? That's one reason that I love reading so much, because whether it's diving into a fictional character or reading a memoir from someone with a different lived experience, I can try to listen to that life experience and see whether or not it can add to my understanding of the world. Several years ago, our church member Rachel Smith introduced me to an annual book challenge called Read Harder. Every year, the independent book group Book Riot publishes a list of books that they suggest you try to push yourself in the next year to see whether or not you can get out of your rut. They're not making precise book recommendations. They give categories. Here's a couple from 2024. Read a young adult book by a trans author. Read a history book by an author who is Black, Indigenous, or a person of color. Read a book in translation from a country that you've never visited. I'll post a link to the book challenge later in the church Facebook group, and if you don't use Facebook, I brought a couple of handouts if you want to grab me after church. But of course, if reading isn't your thing, you can challenge yourself to make sure you're hearing voices in other media. For example, October is LGBTQIA Welcoming Month. We want to recognize the history of what our LGBT community has brought to us. We want to acknowledge the burdens that they continue to face due to bigotry and hate. You can seek out on social media, in music, podcasts, YouTube channels, new books, new films, to try to learn these stories that may not be your story and listen to them. Open yourself up to have more understanding. After listening, then comes the next favorite thing of Unitarians: action. But that's for a different sermon. All I want to suggest right now is, as a month of deep listening, this is your time to take stock and decide, who are you listening to? Who haven't you listened to recently that you could make an effort to expand yourself? Unitarians are good at exploring and searching and learning, but it doesn't have to be a grand scholarly endeavor. It can be just listening, really listening to our neighbors, or people who live in neighborhoods adjacent to us, or in countries adjacent to us. Starting listening in that way opens up new possibilities. You can tilt your head just a little bit to make sure that whoever is talking knows you're listening hard. We now have the joy of Jamie Radcliffe's sermon on deep listening on the video screen.
Hi, my name is Jamie Radcliffe, and I'm a worship associate of this church. It is ironic that so soon after we heard Marge Piercy counsel us that there must be no front to the speaking, no platform, no rostrum, no stage or table, here I am, even higher than the rostrum. I have at least avoided dancing a solo on the ceiling. I was partly inspired to speak today by a quote from Frank Tiger, a longtime columnist and cartoonist for the Trenton Times. He said, "Listening to both sides of a story will convince you that there is more to a story than both sides." Listening, literal and metaphorical, is crucial in many parts of our lives. But where the rubber hits the road, listening-wise, is listening when there is conflict. Political conflict, relationship conflict, work conflict, maybe, who knows, baking conflict. I just started listening to a podcast called Judge John Hodgman. John Hodgman is not a judge, but he plays one both in the pages of the New York Times Magazine and in his podcast, ably assisted by his bailiff, Jesse Thorne. People send in their disputes to him and he renders judgment. Recently in the magazine, he ruled on Angel's case, brought against her co-worker Nick. Nick was planning a baked goods potluck at work, and Angel was excited to bring her excellent baked mac and cheese. Nick said that that wouldn't count. In case you're wondering, the judge ruled against Angel, but summed up as follows. That said, who cares? No one is sad when mac and cheese shows up to the party, especially savory boys like your judge. While some transgressions are designed to shock us, to make us doubt our own judgment as institutions are unraveled and reality is rewritten around us, others are merely delicious. Nick's just worried that you'll upstage his zucchini bread or whatever. And yes, you will. On the podcast, John Hodgman gets a chance to interact in person with the litigants. And very frequently he learns, by careful listening, a lot about the people in front of him, their personalities, their quirks, and what the dispute means to them. John Hodgman is a funny guy, but also a wise man and a great listener. His judgments have a surprising success rate in satisfying both sides. And I think he manages that by being very aware that there's more to a story than both sides. Let's move on from the friendly setting of a comedy podcast with a pretend judge to a slightly more serious arena. The world of formal debate is one that people take very seriously, that has winners and losers. One perennial winner is Julia Dahl, three-time winner of the World Schools Debating Championship. She has described how, when she was a novice debater, she could imagine no better plan than going head-on, being as extreme as possible, attacking the person on the other side, not the arguments they were presenting. Sound familiar? As she became more assured, she realized that the royal road to success in formal debate is not to belittle and dehumanize your opponent, but that the way you reach people is by finding common ground, by creating a shared reality that acknowledges the humanity of your opponent and also the possibility that you are wrong. How sneaky to win by being decent and thoughtful and exhibiting the humility of uncertainty. There's research to back it up too. Juliana Schroeder runs the Social and Moral Judgments Lab at the University of California, Berkeley. One of their projects studies the effect that the medium, text, voice, video chat, has on discussion, in particular, how we judge other people. Summarizing the results of the study, Dr. Schroeder said, "The presence of the voice seems to matter quite a bit for influencing people's judgments. Whether or not we can see each other actually doesn't matter as much. The important cues about the person's mind are coming from the voice. If we sit down face to face and talk, then we are capable of listening. When we communicate via text-only media, then, and maybe this is not a surprise, it is very easy to dehumanize people we disagree with." There are other aspects of formal debate that Julia Dar feels can have wider applicability in helping us to listen and discuss productively. The two sides of a debate are not personalized. It's not Lincoln High's or Lincoln East's proposition that is being debated. Indeed, the sides are assigned randomly. The debaters have no control over which direction they're arguing for. There is strong evidence that in many situations it is productive to gather proposals and then present them without the name of the proposer attached. People are far better at assessing the actual merits of ideas presented to them if they don't know whether it's the CEO's idea or the stockroom clerk's. Toyota became a hugely successful automobile manufacturer partly because it introduced a mechanism whereby all its employees could make suggestions that might improve production and have them evaluated on their merits. Deep listening is, at its heart, an attempt to fight one of the most pernicious problems that all human brains are beset with, confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the very strong tendency for people to listen to lots of things and hear only the ones that match their pre-existing feelings. Social media and the prevalence of text-based communication have whipped up confirmation bias into high art, splintering society and setting tighter and tighter groups against more and more demonized foes. But we are living in times when collective action is crucial. Our hearts go out to everyone affected by Hurricane Helene, and we mourn the devastation it wrought on cities across 6 states. For instance, on Asheville, North Carolina, touted as a climate change haven. My graduated graduate student in Fort Myers, Florida, is cleaning up debris and throwing out ruined furniture for the second time in 2 years. We have become numb to the phrases hottest year on record, Arctic ice dwindling, coral bleaching. The urgency of productive communication feels higher than it has been in my lifetime. Maybe it's finally time to listen to what Marge Piercy wrote in 1971. Perhaps we should sit in the dark. In the dark, we could utter our feelings. In the dark, we could propose and describe and suggest. In the dark, we could not see who speaks, and only the words would say what they say. Thus, saying what we feel and what we want, what we fear for ourselves and each other, into the dark, perhaps we could begin to listen. Our closing hymn is number 298 from the Gray Hymnal, Wake Now My Senses. We're omitting verse 2. The words on the screen will show what we're singing. If you're using a hymnal, skip verse 2.
I feel roused. Thank you, Bill, and thank you all who added your voices. Before our closing piece of music by our guest musician, I have closing words from Emily Richards. She's the Director of Religious Exploration at First Unitarian of Ithaca, New York. Our work here this morning is at an end, and our work has just begun. The work of deep listening, the work of deep understanding, the work of commitment, the work of radical inclusion, the work of collective liberation. The work of this beloved community of which we are all a part is a place where we are all welcomed, respected, valued, cherished, a place where we all belong. Go in peace, amen, and blessed be.
If you have me in October, I'm always going to sing this song. You've heard it before, but I can't help it. It was actually my mother's favorite, so her birthday, she would have been 106 this year. And she's the reason I'm sitting in front of you. Thank you, Mom. When the deer is bedded down and the bear is gone to ground and the northern goose has wandered off to warmer bay and sound, it's so easy in the cold to feel the darkness of the year, and the heart is growing lonely for the morning. When October's growing thin and November's coming home, you'll be thinking of the seasons and the many things you've seen. You can hear that old wind walking, hear him singing high and thin. You could swear it's out there singing for tomorrow. Oh, my darlings, don't you know that the stars are swinging slow, and the seas are rolling easy as they did so long ago. And if I had a thing to give you, I would tell you one more time that the world is always turning towards the morning. And it's a pity that we don't know what the little flowers know. They can take the cold November, they can take the wind and snow. They put their glories all behind them, bow their heads and let it go. Don't you know they'll be there shining in the morning? And oh, my darlings, don't you know that the stars are swinging slow, the seas are rolling easy as they did so long ago. And if I had a thing to give you, I would tell you one more time that the world is always turning towards the morning. If I had a thing to give you, I would tell you one more time that the world is always turning towards the morning.
Actually, I have to go out to the truck to get the tile stuff, so I'll stop on.
Doing my hair. Really stiff.